Schizophrenics of Reddit. How did it start? Serious. People seemed like they were always looking at me and talking about me, more than usual. I started getting worried the ground might vanish or my car windows were TV screens showing me fake sights. Saw little light pixie lights floating around by the time I got into the psych ward. When I was a very young child, I used to get visited by this light show that would come when I was scared and couldn't sleep. It was so pretty and looked like moving beads across the walls, almost like a kaleidoscope. Didn't connect that was the beginning until years after my diagnosis. Before I was aware it was a thing, I woke up to lights being on that I swore I turned off, hearing things in the house. I started to think my house was haunted, which was stupid considering I have a family history. My house was not haunted, my brain is. My first legitimate psychotic break, I was mountain climbing, saw a child on the summit and freaked out that he was going to fall. My friend just stared at me, there wasn't anyone there. Edit, thank you for all the well wishes and awards. Very kind and unexpected. Schizophrenia is something I struggle to talk about in my real life because the stigma is enormous. I would hear a loud party in the kitchen, as a kid, when everyone was sleeping. It creeped me out at first, but eventually I could choose what music they played and I stopped being scared. I had the feeling people were watching me, but would stop as soon as I started to watch them back. Then it began to feel like I was judged on everything I was doing, on how I was performing in life. At this time I was 13. It ramped up slowly until I reached 16. You know that feeling when you're talking to yourself but you slowly realized it is not you that you can hear in your mind? I had that 3 days before Christmas when I got 16 years old, but I didn't want to tell my parents. It's Christmas, not exactly the best time to declare yo, I am batshit crazy when you have family over, and let me tell you my voice was super convincing to keep that for myself. Luckily for me, my aunt could not make it to my parents' house because she believed the FBI was looking for her. My uncle brought her to a psychiatrist, who declared she had schizophrenia. It became clear to me that I was going through the same thing as her, so I told my parents. Then I got my diagnostic. That was the worst Christmas I have ever had. When I got married and suddenly moved across the country with my husband to college was my first psychotic break. Two voices started talking to me regularly after that, and I realized that one of them had been there since high school. I just assumed everyone had an outsider voice talking to them too. March 21, 2014, there was a party at my house and I thought everyone was plotting to kill me. They weren't, so I went to the kitchen and cut my throat with a knife. I figured if I was gonna die, I'd go out on my own terms. I've been having psychotic delusions ever since. I microdosed LSD to cure long-term treatment-resistant depression and anxiety, supplementing every few months with MDMA. When I stopped this regimen I began believing strange things and started hearing voices. I was a member of Zen at the time and put on quite a shit show with spiritual enlightenment as the primary object and interpretation of my illness. This lasted for some months, eventually culminating in hospitalization. Several years, thousands of dollars, and a lifetime later I am doing quite well, but for some time I was completely disabled and had to build back from that. I noticed it in my early preteens, 12-14, and was dismissed by my family as being difficult, a liar, and never able to finish anything. By the time I hit my 20s I was a dissociating, narcissistic bitch who had no idea what reality was ever. I finally got actually diagnosed at age 25 and have had ups and downs for 25 years now. There wasn't necessarily a begin point, but I guess the first thoughts I started to have that were intrusive began when I was 14-15. I consistently thought the people around me wanted to kill me or harm me in some way. Didn't matter who it was. I started to believe that I could read people's minds and their intentions. I thought that my mother and father and everyone I thought was close would talk behind their backs and come to conclusions that I was someone they had to eliminate. It spun pretty deep from here. By the time I turned 20-ish the thoughts became voices other than my own. I started to manifest outside influence within my mind. I believed that I could speak to God and he would speak back. We would have conversations. Lots of stuff just kept coming up. I didn't tell anyone, and made it worse when I did. I told my mother about this when I was about 22, and for a year or so she constantly would make comments that she was afraid I would murder her, and told multiple people about my condition without my permission, and would say things like she needs to lock her door at night now, and she can't leave her room at night because she thinks I'll come murder her. So I guess you can decide where it came from. Do you mean why? In my case it was genetic. My grandfather, uncle, aunt, and 3 cousins also have schizophrenia. It didn't start suddenly. My first total psychotic break wasn't until a few years after I started hearing voices. The first hallucination I had was of a snake, and it was because I knew it wasn't real that it was frightening. I kept insight whilst the experiences grew for a few years until I lost it and derailed into total delusion. My delusions, when they occur these days, mainly consist of the idea that something, a mechanical ball, a giant grub, a controlling diode, has been inserted into me somehow and I have to remove it, or I or others will die or be harmed as a result. Main reason why I don't have an iod or similar for birth control, it would certainly trigger my illness enough to rip it out. No story but a question. So much of the paranoia schizophrenics present with seems to revolve around suspicion of technology. What would schizophrenic onset look like several hundred years ago? I started hearing people talking about me constantly, and people calling or whispering my name. As a kid I was always afraid of people watching me, and although I realize that can't be true now, I still have the same problem. I also began to see bugs where there weren't any, and a masked man sometimes. This may have began when I saw a Slenderman documentary when I was a young kid that scared the shit out of me. I remember asking myself where my dad went, and I heard a voice answer that wasn't mine. I had been an avid daydreamer where I'd use different voices for characters and such, so I was used to having other people's voices in my head. I wasn't all that concerned when they started answering of their own accord, and only when I began to sense creatures behind me in dark rooms and hear screams from nowhere when I'm alone did I wish to seek treatment. My dad always had delusions of grandeur where he thought he was way more important than he actually is. Around 40, he started having hallucinations about angels with bright and pretty colors involved. Eventually, they devolved into paranoid delusions and hallucinations about the government putting chips in his arm and tracking him through the radio or some shit. He is a non-compliant patient. It started in high school for me. I suffered from childhood trauma and a suicide attempt before all this, so those may have been factors that caused it. At first it was voices. I thought I could hear spirits and talk to them. Then I started seeing them. Sometimes they were like people, other times they were more like demons. They would often harass me and frighten me in public places, try to get me to react. For some reason I believed that this all had to be kept a secret, so I tried my best not to acknowledge them when I was around other people. There were also other things like strings coming out of people's skin. I also started believing that my dreams were prophetic and the end of the world was coming. Eventually my parents caught on that something was wrong with me and they took me to see a psychiatrist. That was when I was 18. To this day I still have a phobia of mirrors thanks to one hallucination I had. I'm a paranoid schizophrenic who has a bunch of fun symptoms that are a bit lengthy to get into, but the most random, interesting one is that I have visual hallucinations of bears in my home. Now it's more like a no, what, why is there a bear in my room? Guess I'll close the door so it can't get out and sleep on the couch instead, sorta deal. I used to freak out, lock myself in the bathroom crying my eyes out and call people that there's a bear in my house, but I just try to remind myself now when I see one that I live on the 14th story in an inner city apartment building in New Zealand. Why would there be a bear in my apartment? I started meeting these huge wolves in a forest near where I lived. The rest of the world disappeared and I could morph into a wolf myself and just run around as if running away from danger and towards a new hunt, while I was just a girl who took off her shoes and socks, no matter what the weather was like. running around the forest. When I was particularly stressed out, I would sneak out in the middle of the night to run with the wolves. Feelings of being followed, watched, and general paranoia. I used to do everything as if I was being recorded, screaming in my head in an attempt to fade out my own thoughts that I felt was not controlled by me. Seeing shadow people, generally a vivid imagination and a lot of daydreaming to escape reality as scared child. I was diagnosed with schizophrenia at 19 after several years in and out of mental institutions, but now that I am almost 24, I believe that I don't have schizophrenia, even though mental illness including schizophrenia runs in my family. Another psychologist I had for several years believed I have CPTSD and DID, which I personally relate better with, but since I got the diagnosis, I thought I'd share my beginning of psychotic behavior. I thought everyone was having conversations behind my back. Every little slip-up that went unnoticed to the public suddenly made me a laughing tack in my eyes. Then I began to hear the same conversations behind my back, whenever I was alone in the house. Had it in my family, but lived an active life and didn't think I was predisposed until after smoking weed every day for 2 years or so. One day I woke up and my perception of myself had changed. I won't go into detail as of how, but I continued to use drugs and went on to harder ones, and during the 18 years I used meth I could relate to almost every mental illness I heard described. The doctors gave me the diagnosis schizophrenia, but I'm completely rehabilitated now, and with medication I live a good life, better than I thought were possible. So I don't have schizophrenia, but I do have major depression with psychotic features. Basically, when I was at my lowest, I would think everyone was looking and talking about me and hear the awful things they said about me. Thought I ran over someone multiple times while driving, would imagine them walking, hear the hit, then go out and nothing would be there. Once I was properly medicated and in therapy, it stopped happening. I was severely depressed for months and months before this started happening. I have had these episodes twice in my life, both at my lowest points and a major depression. I luckily haven't had any issues for years now that I'm treated. At 12, after long periods of intense mental distress, it started with me getting really paranoid of other people. Then I started hearing a single voice. It was comforting at first. It didn't talk a lot, but it was like having a friend I could vent to and who would validate my feelings. But then it turned against me. It ended up with me thinking I'm possessed by a demon sent from hell to punish me for supposedly killing my twin sister while we were in the womb, which has never happened. My mom was never expecting twins. That whole period of my life is so blurry, and when I read my diaries I wrote at that time, it's more like I'm reading something a completely different person wrote. It almost feels intrusive. I knew a smart, funny lady whose illness was at the onset. She was very open about it. She would ask me, amid an otherwise normal conversation, "Are there birds in here?" I'd tell her there weren't. Or, when out walking, "Do you see a man by that tree looking at us?" I'd tell her number. She knew these were hallucinations. She had begun to see a doctor about it. As a child I thought everyone was always talking about and laughing at me. As a child I was afraid if I made too much noise I would be hit. My environment was abusive, so this was a legitimate fear. So whenever I thought I was making a little too much noise, I would start hearing sounds like someone was upset and reacting to me. I'm not schizophrenic, but my mom's best friend from college was diagnosed 3 or 4 years ago. One day she called my mom on the verge of tears and told her that people in the subway had been telling her to throw herself on the tracks. She was genuinely hurt and confused as to why people she didn't even know would tell her that. She had a history of mental illness and suicide in her immediate family, so my mom knew straight away. It was terrifying and heartbreaking. It was at the age of 8, I remember getting bullied by everyone and the crying in a dark loft, and I constantly used to think that someone is there watching me. Sometimes hear things, and after like a week or two, I used to hear and see things almost every time and everywhere. It's right for my bad English though. Yeah, it started with having a really rough upbringing for a few of my early years. Then when it hit, it was diagnosed as cannabis psychosis. I take like 2 pills, and I don't fucking worry about it. Not that I like the idea of being marginalized because of such a diagnosis. Maybe I am a little rough on myself for it. Life can be like walking a tightrope sometimes, not that it isn't for a lot of people. Yikes, now I'm 25M, scared that I might get that too, because it's inheritable. My dad, 63M, was diagnosed with schizophrenia and severe depression. Unfortunately, he died few months ago. I found him dead as naked and room was messed up. About 10 years ago he covered windows with bed of sheets etc. But I was kid that time and couldn't understand why. But now I know why, because someone here commented that they covered windows too etc. By reading his medical history, he told them that someone was making pictures, filming outside of windows. Also he heard some voices in his head. My first experience was cause of cannabis. I started off just really paranoid, then I started hearing voices in the television talking to me until it came to a point I saw an invisible man in my room and shook hands with him. Then after that I started thinking I was being sent to hell. Like at that moment freaked out and called my parents. They came to pick me up. I had moved away. Then it was total mental breakdown, non-stop voices, hallucinations and delusions for months. I remember once being convinced my parents weren't my parents. They had murdered my real parents and the dinner we were eating was made from my parents' remains. Needless to say, I didn't eat that night. This went on for about 3 months and then things kinda calmed down. The telly still spoke to me and I had delusions of reference, which is where you think something or someone is referencing you in some way when they're not. Like the telly thing. In public settings too. I've had about 3 big relapses since then. Usually the same stuff. Aliens are coming to take over the world. An apocalypse is happening. You know, scary shit lol. But in between when I'm calm and on medication, I generally enjoy having a friend who talks to me through the telly and other people, and they're generally quite nice as long as I remain vigilant about taking my meds and so on. I do not have schizophrenia, but the book Eden Express by Mark Vonnegut is fascinating for understanding how someone with schizophrenia slowly loses touch with reality. He was diagnosed in his 20s, and as a reader you don't know at first if he is just an unreliable narrator. If 3 years in community-level behavioral health taught me ... it can happen anywhere, at any time, to anyone. I had a client that worked Wall Street and had a nice NYC Upper East Side condo. Had her first episode at 35. By 40 she was living with parents and couldn't organize her socks. Behavioral health outcomes can be simply tragic in our current system. Hey, I can answer this one. For me, it started with anxiety. Anxiety about everything, always nervous and always worried. Spent an entire childhood like that. I lived in a good house with a good family, but I was scared of everything and was very dependent on adults. In older childhood, hallucinations started, and some bizarre delusions. I was finally diagnosed at age 19. Being diagnosed was very positive for me. Finally having an accurate label meant accurate treatment. Age 23 right now and doing well. Schizoaffective here. The earliest I remember hallucinating was when I was a small child. I would see the shadows of dinosaurs moving around in the playground and around my bed when nothing else would move. I was often regarded as having an overactive imagination. The voices started becoming relevant around 15, but I'd always talk back and forth to imaginary friends or voices in my head. My visual hallucinations started as seeing little black specks flitting around my vision, almost like a cloud of gnats or bugs or something. Progressed to seeing animals everywhere, with the very rare faceless person. My auditory hallucinations started as hearing indecipherable whispers. I could occasionally make out my name, but otherwise, basically just white noise. It quickly progressed to indecipherable screaming. Thankfully, my meds work quite well, and the hallucinations are back to the stage they first manifested, which I can deal with. I'm schizoaffective, not schizophrenic, but for me it was never being able to tell the difference between dreaming and being awake. Something so ridiculous would happen that I'd be convinced I was dreaming it, like seeing glimpses of ghosts in mirrors behind me. On the other hand, my dreams were so vivid and realistic that I'd get in trouble a lot as a kid, convinced I had done my homework and chores, arguing with my parents that they were messing with me for no reason. Combined with night terrors, it's no wonder I started attempting suicide as soon as I learned what it was. It's not quite as bad now, but just last week I had a nightmare so realistic that I woke up checking my arms for radiation burns from the nuke that I thought went off.